This is a 1942 Packard World War II Army staff car. They did about 200, little less than that, cars off the factory line before everybody shut down war production. February 22nd, 1942 is when Packard stopped making cars and they started making engines for the PT boats and also, of course, the P-51 Mustang. The U.S. Air Force Museum here has a Merlin on display, and thankfully we have both the Packard Merlin, the Packard car, and the P-51 Mustang all together, which I think is really cool. We drove the car from America's Packard Museum, which is located in downtown Dayton. It's an original Packard dealership that was built in 1917, and it's been automotive related ever since. 1992 is when it started being America's Packard Museum. And today at about 7:30 or so, we drove this car from the Packard Museum all the way till where it sits right here. We got to drive the car through the museum, which was phenomenal. One thing we're really focusing on is that a lot of people don't realize kind of the civilian aspect of what everyone had to do from 1942 till about 1945, which was essentially shut the country down and make things for World War II. You know, the United States was 39th. Their military was ranked 39th in the world in 1939, and they quickly became the forefront to stopping the Axis powers in both Europe and the Pacific. And a lot of it was thanks to the automotive industry. You know, the World War II, that whole era, they didn't have a real war production foundation set, so they asked Bill Knutson, who was in charge of General Motors, to create the war production board. And he pretty much overnight changed every single automotive manufacturer to war production, so we could supply the English and all of our friends, and also create a huge war stock for us when we eventually in 1944, which was 80 years, almost exactly 80 years ago today, invaded Europe for the name of freedom. So, you know, and Packard had a huge part in that. Eisenhower drove a Cadillac in Africa famously, but in Europe he drove a Packard because it had air conditioning in it. Packard was the first company to put air conditioning in automobiles. They were the first company to put a V12 in a production car. They were the first company to put a steering wheel on a production car. So they had a lot of firsts. The company operated from 1899 until 1958, mostly in Detroit. They did start here in Ohio. They were originally the Ohio Automobile Company before they became Packard. America's Packard Museum kind of has a doctrine, all the cars should still run. It's kind of a living museum. Most of the cars in there operate. Some of them have not been running for a while. Actually, this car hasn't ran in quite some time, so we had a dedicated group of volunteers that spent a lot of time working on it. We put a new fuel tank in it, we rebuilt the carburetor, we put a new head gasket on it, we completely redid the brakes on it, just so it can make the trip from downtown to the museum here. That kind of thing is important. You know, what's great about our museum is that it constantly evolves. We get new cars in all the time. You know, we've got about 50 cars on display right now. The earliest car we have is a 1902, and the latest car we have is 1981. We have a DeLorean on display. We've got a couple of, you know, Packard adjacent cars, but we have, you know, cars that run the whole gambit from, you know, essentially the beginning of Packard to the very end. I've been coming here ever since I can remember. We got to drive the car into the building and put it in the spot it was in. I actually got to drive underneath the Memphis Belle for just a moment to get the car back into the position that was. And I can tell you that, you know, as an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 12-year-old, I would never have expected something like this would have been possible. I wouldn't have expected that the Air Force Museum would have grown into what it is today. It's gotten quite big since I was a little kid. And the fact that I get to be part of that growth is quite something special. It's something that I like I said, I don't think I ever could have expected something like this. I mean, again, it's hard to put it into words.